Welcome to MuscleBox Radio. I'm your host, Stephen Box, and my co-host is Michael Harrison. This show is going to be all about nutrition, training, bodybuilding, with loads of banter. We're going to be giving you the evidence, the science, and breaking that down with the help of some amazing guests and industry leaders to give you that application. So make sure you subscribe, and I hope you enjoy the show. Episode number 10 of MuscleBox Radio. Stephen Box here. So Michael Harrison, how are we doing this week?
I'm good, mate. How are you?
But I'm holding in there.
And you're in peak week for your first show of the season, right?
Yeah. Well, technically, my first two shows of the season, because I'm doing two classes, I've decided.
Ah. Woo!
Well, I thought...
So, which classes?
I'm going to be doing the men's physique.
Yeah.
And then
bikini.
And bikini. Yep.
Yeah.
No, the men's fitness model.
Nice.
Yep.
Because somebody's quite good looking, eh? Mm.
I just want to get my legs out.
Okay.
They're my best attribute.
Yeah, they are, yeah.
So
yeah. So with that, we thought that peak week would be a great topic, as it's pretty apt at the minute, and obviously I'm going to be coming into mine in 4 weeks' time alongside you, Steve, and it's something that we hear a lot about, right?
Yeah, and also because last week I had to peak week a couple of clients, both for photo shoots. So again, it's kind of been on my mind in playing around with some different protocols based on their situation. So I thought we could share a little bit of that. And like you said, yeah, a lot of people kind of, it's competition season. It's I wrote a blog post actually the other day. I just wanted to kind of sit down and reflect a little bit on this show, and I'll post that blog post out when I've typed it all up. But one of the things that you often hear is a lot of the judges' feedback, or sometimes their coaches' feedback to an athlete if they haven't done particularly well, is, oh, you just didn't quite get your water cut right. Or you're just holding on to a little bit of water, and it's like you kind of needed another 10 weeks of dieting.
Yeah.
But that's a lot harder to say to someone.
Oh God, yeah.
Obviously, water retention can be caused by so many factors, even the stress of the event. If you're anxious or you've got some anxiety about actually competing, then you might retain a little bit more water than how you did the day before maybe. It's I think an apt topic, like you said, in one we can really sort of get stuck into, and people can kind of decipher for themselves if it's worth bothering about, whether they should bother, and maybe some of the the pros and cons. Let's just kind of have a good round table around it.
Yeah. So I think people often look at it as some magic again, because obviously everybody's wanting the magic supplement or the magic training plan or whatever, and people see this as the magic week. And I think it's pretty important to say that unless you're ready, nothing drastic is going to be happening this week. It's just about presenting the package, maybe taking a little bit of stress off, reducing maybe some of that water retention, and going into the show. But ideally...
And that was a great episode 10, guys. We'll see you next week for episode 11.
Done!
No, also, one thing I would like to say is apologies that there was no episode last week. So there's been a 1 week extra gap between shows. We do apologise, but we had our first ever Team Box muscle hypertrophy camp, didn't we?
Oh, spit it out, Steve. Fucking out.
Yeah. I got prep mouth.
Yeah.
So we had our first camp.
It was awesome.
The feedback's been unbelievable, hasn't it?
It was everything and more. Like, I'll be honest and say that I wasn't expecting it to be as good as what it was. I was expecting it to be good, but I can't speak highly enough of it. Just the whole atmosphere from start to finish. It was hard work, but it was just unbelievable experience. And if I wasn't there as a coach, I would have been there as a client. It was that good, and I genuinely believe that it's one of the best things in the fitness industry for people to attend. Like, seriously.
No, mate, we did a great job, I think, and obviously, like, I'm a very critical person anyway, and there was a lot of things I thought I wanted to achieve with that, and you guys worked so hard with me in the planning stages, and the couple of days before, and Dan and Laura especially just helping me laminate and print all the resources off and everything else. And I think I was pretty stressed out, hoping everyone would like it. And I mean, we've just been overwhelmed by support from the people who came. We had a total of 17 guests.
Yeah.
And then obviously us 5 coaches. So quite a big group. Like, I've never ran anything to that extent before. The previous retreats that I've run were never at this sort of capacity, so it was an extra challenge. But yeah, we kind of had MuscleFood supplied us with a load of goodies, so huge thanks to those. They gave us a £75 voucher to spend on food, but instead we gave it out to one of our clients who showed unbelievable, I would say, team box spirit. Lance, he did a great job just by kind of being there for everyone, picking everyone up, and just being an overall kind of happy-go-lucky guy, really. We had a company called Prepped, and they supplied all our lunches with all the macronutrient values on, and it was good tasting food, wasn't it? And just convenience was fantastic. Went out for some food, went to Nando's, went to a steak restaurant, and also Team Breakthrough. Big thank you to them for actually letting us use their amazing facilities that they've got in Bath.
Yeah. It was we had a wide sort of variety of people that come right from beginners all the way up to coaches themselves and other PTs and things, and it was just a great environment for everybody to be in, because people were learning off one another, not just the coaches, and people were, because everybody was cooking together and things like that. People were looking, oh, what's he having for breakfast? Oh, I'm going to try that, and people just took so much more away, and it was just that environment where perhaps they might be coming from a background where not everybody understands what they're doing in terms of family and friend circles, where we could just go away, relax, be around people with the same common goals. And because we've all got the same common goals and we're all pretty much legends, everybody got on so well. And in fact, all 17, 18 people have asked to book onto the next one straight away before anyone else gets a chance, which is nice. I don't think it's going to be quite possible, but
In some of the content I had back was like, was great variety in the content that we delivered. Obviously I did mine mostly on muscle hypertrophy, on biomechanics, on physics. For some of them it kind of like blew their mind because they've never heard anything like that before. And then they had more like workshops with you and Laura, obviously, to tackle their own problems, which I know they found really helpful. And then soft skill work with Dan, again, like through practical application. But then also another one that we didn't even have time for was Chris is on deloading in strength protocol and periodization. So there's still more content to come, which is really exciting, so that when these guys do come back, we can expand on what we've already done, deliver a little bit more, and kind of take what we've already done to new areas of content. So if new or old people come, then I don't mean old as in age, I mean as in repeaters, that will hopefully learn some more stuff again. But yeah, it was awesome. Anyway, let's be in soppy.
Some questions then. So, peak week, how much are you expecting to improve your physique in peak week, and how much emphasis do you place on it?
Yeah, I think for me, peak week, I wrote down a definition actually what I thought peak week was for, and I just kind of wanted to explore that a little bit, and I'll probably tidy this up a little bit and put it in my blog post. But basically, for me, peak week is about controlling all variables. It's a position where I am hopefully gonna control as many variables as I possibly can in order to look the best I possibly can in that time period on one particular day. And I've got one shot at doing it, essentially.
Yeah, and what are those variables?
So the main variables, I suppose, if you look at the first one and the most important, is going to be calorie balance. So calorie balance across the week, and then broken down into daily amounts, whether some are low, some are high, or whatever, but overall calorie intake. The next one is then going to be broken down into macronutrient macronutrient breakdowns, and then also food choices. So they're kind of, I think, for me, the big three. And then, which again is very similar to the whole setup of the diet. Calories most important, then macros, and then probably mindful eating. So a diet predominantly more based on single ingredient foods rather than kind of like junk food, maybe something like that.
Why? So why is that? Why would you say that?
So, well, apart from the basics of going beyond what we would normally do, so we'd normally say 80%, wouldn't we, in prep for single ingredient food, and that's just to make sure you're getting enough, micronutrients, nourishment in the diet, and that your digestion's pretty good. But for me, I take it probably to maybe 90% in peak week. I still have, a flexible approach to my dieting. I don't restrict. I don't, not restrict, that's the wrong word. I don't exclude any food groups in peak week still. So I still have things like dairy. I still have, basically what I'd normally do out for my entire prep. One thing I do reduce is the amount of things like sugar-free jellies or, heavily sweetened foods, because I find personally I retain a little bit of water off those sort of foods. Now, again, we're just trying to minimize all the variables as possible. So if I'm having a lot of sauces and they're containing a lot extra sodium that I'm unable to equate for, then again, that might have fluctuations day to day on my water retention. I think. And also there is that week where you've got such a hyper-focused goal that you think, right, I've got 1 week I can dig here, I can be, really accurate and really consistent and actually kind of feel like a bodybuilder for once. Prep's been pretty easy, so...
Exactly. If you've done a 20-odd week prep, been nice and flexible, I'm sure you can push for 1 week, but I think a lot of people make the mistake in the last week. They've done all their prep on broccoli, sweet potato and chicken, and then all of a sudden, the last week, it's bring out the Pop-Tarts, the Skittles, and pick pizza the night before. And, like we know that those things aren't necessarily a bad thing, but if you've spent the whole of prep without these foods, then potentially you're leaving yourself at risk to maybe a little bit of a flare-up, a little bit of water retention, because you don't know how you're going to react to maybe the gluten in the bread or potentially dairy, like you said, and that yourself is fine with dairy, so why bother cut it out? But again that those sweetened jellies and things like that does cause a little bit of an issue. So again, you're being wise in your choices to just minimise any sort of any water retention fluctuations you do get.
Again, last night I did actually have a sugar-free jelly because I was in the position where I was like, well, if I don't eat something, this might actually prevent a binge or prevent going over my macros because I was hungry. So actually getting a little bit of satiety, and I'm still what we now Thursday, so I'm still 3 days out. So that's going to come off me easily. But sometimes they can be useful, these foods, for satiety reasons, so that you don't, again, break the first rule, which is calorie balance, right?
Yeah, sure.
So I think that's
you don't want to be eating all the food.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the difference as well, when we talk about calories, you've got... let's have a chat about who do we think a peak week is for. Okay. Now, obviously... For most people, it's weird because everyone does a peak week regardless, whether they're actually in condition or not. They think, everyone I know is like, it's now peak week, I'm doing this, I'm water cutting, I'm only drinking bottled water or whatever it might be. And I agree to the extent of the kind of, if it's not going to do any harm, then why not try something like if it was eating just single ingredient foods, for example. So if you have been, you dieted for 24 weeks, you don't want to leave anything to chance. You don't want to leave any stone unturned, do you? So if you can do it, then why not, as long as it's not going to do any harm. But I think a lot of people who try and do a peak week, there is absolutely no need to do a peak week. And actually, they should be reviewing whether they should do that show or not. Because a peak week's not going to magic any fat away.
I think people go, I'm just holding a bit of water. As soon as I dry out, as soon as I cut my sodium, cut my water, start to drink white wine, then all of a sudden I'm going to be shredded. And, it's not the case. And obviously, a lot of people mistake fat for water. And it is a fact that you just needed to diet a little bit longer. And we all know the person who's ready 3 or 4 weeks out and they look fucking fantastic in the gym.
Yeah.
So if they look fantastic in the gym, carry on doing what you're doing, and there's no need to change anything. And it can often go so wrong when people try and manipulate too many variables and try and get a little bit too funky when all they need to do is just carry on doing what they're doing and they're going to look pretty good. So
that's it. It's about being constant, isn't it? With those, making your variables constants, so that you can understand. Okay, you can look at yourself every day and go, yeah, I'm maintaining my current great condition that I'm already in. And if you can continue to do that, then there's no necessarily magic thing you can do in order to improve your physique. Obviously, I think there might be a difference for, maybe enhanced athletes. So they might need to, and I'm not one to speak for those kind of guys, so I'm not too sure in terms of water manipulation or how much water might be retained because of utilizing any performance enhancing drugs. But for me, it's a case of it's a case of still look at your constants, and if you're keeping that the same and you look amazing, then just keep doing what you're doing, but still apply the same basic principles. It would be more of a case of like it's not gone to plan. Do you know what I mean? So that's when I wouldn't be able to speak to that. But if you've got an athlete who's enhanced and they're in great condition, 2-3 weeks out, then as long as you don't change anything on that side of stuff, you can just maintain variables, right?
I think so. And you can only fuck it up, right? By being too drastic. There are certain things we can manipulate, like we're going to talk about now, but there is a big risk of fucking things up, especially if you're already looking pretty good. So obviously, when we look at a peak week, we've obviously covered maybe the energy balance already, and maybe the food choices. So we've got a few other common things that we see. We see
carbohydrate intake.
Yeah, so we see water depletion, water loading, carbohydrate depletion, carbohydrate loading, and sodium depletion and possibly sodium loading. So let's talk about these things as we go.
Start off with carbs.
Carbs? We love the carbs.
Yeah. Again, I think probably sorting out carbohydrate balance is probably more important than the other two. So that I think, let's tackle that one first. So in terms of calorie balance, is going to depend on essentially whether you need that week to diet still. So if you're a little bit behind on your prep, like for this one, for me, I know my coach put me as a backload because he wanted to keep me in a calorie deficit for longer rather than, having more calories at the front of the week. And again, most of these extra calories come from carbohydrates, so that's kind of why we'll talk about it in together. So the reason why I needed that extra week was because I essentially did a show, or I'm doing a show 4 weeks prior to when I was actually meant to be, or the original goal date, and I'm pretty much there now. So I needed kind of maybe one more week to kind of really dial in, and it was just a case of being in a calorie deficit for one more week. Really, that's kind of what I needed. Now, then it will be a case of making sure. For me, when you step on stage, you want to have the leanest condition you can, whilst having the biggest amount of lean body mass. So lean body mass is made up of, primarily, obviously you've got organ, but then you've also got your like skeletal muscle mass, and then the water that is retained in the muscle mass as well, and everything else. So basically everything that isn't fat mass. So for me as a competitor, I am when I step on stage, I'm not going to be the biggest guy. So I want to make sure I'm nice and full. Whereas some people, if they are over muscled in a class, they might have to carbohydrate restrict to bring themselves, to look a little bit visually smaller, maybe visually a little bit stringier, so that they fit that class. So I think it can depend on where you sit in terms of how much muscle you have to what class and federation that you're competing in. So that is something to bear in mind.
Yeah. Yeah, which sounds a little bit counterintuitive to some people, right? That you want to maybe flatten yourself out and things like that. But people do have to remember that it is categorized and that you do have specific requirements. So you can go in looking a little bit too hard, a little bit too lean for certain competitions. So when we look at why we manipulate carbohydrate, for those people who don't know, what is it about the carbohydrates that we are looking to do?
So with the carbohydrate intake, it's a case of filling out muscle mass. And then with every gram of carbohydrate that you store as glycogen in the muscle cell, then you'll store, 3 to 4 grams of water within that glycogen as well. And that's just essentially going to give you a fuller, harder look. So that it's one of those things where, when you step on stage, you want to be on stage with a pump. And everyone knows the difference between when they're in the gym and they're, obviously... they've got that pump and that hardness and that fullness compared to 20 minutes after the gym and it's kind of disappeared. So that's what we're trying to recreate on stage.
So how would you gauge carbohydrate intake to get the best out of this carb up? To prevent maybe a spillover to too many carbohydrates or too little even.
So what it's going to look like over the week? You mean?
Yeah, so how would you gauge relative amounts? I know that perhaps looking at doing a practice run, or even using your weekly refeeds or multiple refeeds to mimic what you might do over the week. Is that something that you would do?
Yeah, so for me, it's a case of looking at when I coach athletes. They generally have a high day in their plan, throughout prep. And basically, for me, I use that high day as a marker of their current also their initial maintenance calories. So if let's say they finish their off season on 400 grams of carbs, 70 fats, 200 protein or whatever, I'm not going to change that. I'm just going to keep one day the same as that. And I'm not going to try and take away from that. I'll take away from the other 6 days generally, unless I need to be flexible around the client, and which often happens as well. But anyway, so I know kind of how much every single week, how well that they're getting on with that high day. So we can start to look at their performance in the gym. That's the only marker you can go by initially throughout prep is how they feel after that kind of day. But then when they obviously start to get in much better condition, the last kind of 4 weeks, especially with Blake, because I dieted him down well in advance for his show, essentially every single week for like 4 weeks, I was like, take your pictures after your high day, and I could see the results of what was happening. But then when you can kind of see, do you look best the day after your high day, or do you look best 2 days after your high day? And then you can kind of gauge, well, when did he look his best, and when did I start to carb him up? So with this example of the 400, I think 70 I used, you can then start to stack those days together in terms of look at overall calorie intake and carbohydrate intake until you looked your best. So if you're having 200 on a low day, 400 on a high day, then for digestion purposes, you might split those 3-3. That might be what you do. Now, for some people, they might need to be a lot higher. Now, it's going to be very much depending on how well you utilize carbohydrates and everything else. So essentially, the more you can practice and get a feel for this, the better. Just even maintaining a high day in your week is going to help you, assess like your digestion and all that kind of stuff, which can make a difference on the day.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, because obviously, and that's something that you have to be very, very maybe particular about and monitor the person from one person to the next, because obviously some people are hyper responders in terms of you give them a little bit more carbs and all of a sudden they start to move a great deal more and get through more carbohydrates and flatten out quicker than other people, don't. And it is very, very sort of individualized, and that's why we have such close contact with clients within the last week, because you want to make sure that 20 odd weeks of dieting has been, you're not going to come in too flat, and you want to give them, the best chance of presenting the best package that they've got, right?
Yeah, with my client James, I've just prepped for a photo shoot, and Blake, recently Darren had a show a couple of weeks ago where he came third in a men's physique class in his first time. It was a case of every single day in the evening, okay, send me some pictures. after they've had a lot of amount of their food, so I can kind of see what they look like pretty much full, because by the time they get to stage, that's where I want them to be. So at the kind of near the end of the day, evening time, they'd send over pictures, and I'd ask them, okay, how do you feel? You know, do you feel flat? Do you feel full? Do you feel hard? Do you feel soft? And then they can start to feed back to me on how they're looking. And then obviously I can make sure that I'm, you know, just keeping progress in keeping tabs on things. And then and essentially once you've got someone absolutely peeled, like for example Blake, it's an easy job. I think we had him at the start of that week a couple of low days, or you know, the sort of his low days are what I'm going to call, they're only low because they are the lowest his calories went at that stage of prep. So let's take the couple of weeks before that, it was only a few more days on those macros basically. And then it was a case of I actually gave him a refeed like 4 days out from his shoot. He had that, and then I sort of saw how he looked, and I was like, okay, I actually then put carbohydrates somewhere between his low day and his high day, and just maintain that every single day, so that he was essentially back at maintenance.
Yeah.
So he didn't feel like there was any drastic changes, but you could see in his physique he just started to look a lot harder and fuller. And then all I just had to do was maintain that, you know, because I basically hit the perfect condition with him, I thought anyway. You know, a few days out, and I was like, well, let's just keep everything the exact same. There's really no need to change anything, especially for a first time prep. Why jeopardize that?
Exactly. Yeah.
Whereas,
yeah.
I was going to say with other.
Go.
I was going to say with other clients that I've worked with, and in particularly females I've had, and I don't know whether this is just it could be, and it probably is completely coincidence, so bear that in mind. When I've worked with a couple of athletes before who are female, I backloaded them, so I only gave them the high day a day before their show. And actually they lost a lot of their water retention that they had, and I think it was a case of that their body was just you know, a little bit happier having a lot more carbohydrates in the diet, and maybe I should have brought those carbohydrates in earlier. But both females actually said to me that everything seemed to come together on the day, that they were a little bit anxious, they felt a little bit softer the day before, you know, and also in the week leading, but then actually on the day they did actually look and feel their best. So it was a productive week, keeping them in a calorie deficit, obviously for longer, but then also in just to basically give yourself more days in a calorie deficit. But then with that backload and that higher amount of carbohydrates, things did tighten up a little bit, and they did feel like they were a little bit harder, which again kind of makes sense, doesn't it? So
yeah. And so obviously we've touched a bit on carbs there. Obviously going into show day, you're going to want to sort of just keep yourself topped up, because the hard work will pretty much be done maybe on the load beforehand. So how would you go about using fats on a day like that, or even on the carb load as well?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because there's a couple of schools of thought. You think, well, do you just slam carbohydrates, or do you spend some of those calories actually coming from fat as well? Honestly, I don't know. I couldn't tell you which way's better than another. I think it's worth kind of having a play around with, and like you said, a practice peak week could be really good. I know me and Dan have spoke about for his peak week this year. I want to experiment a very, very low fat day with a higher amount of carbohydrates. Yeah.
Would that be not on the show day, but on the carb up, would you say?
Yeah.
Yeah. And essentially, that's what looking through some things that I've seen. That's what I would go for.
Yeah.
I'd go for maybe a lower fat, higher carb approach during that day, and then with on the day maybe lower the carbohydrates slightly with more fat in there to obviously slow down that absorption of the carbohydrates, keep you full throughout the day, and obviously bring out a little bit of vascularity with the increased triglycerides.
Yeah, because you'll store triglycerides within your muscle cells anyway, won't you? So if you can reach a little bit of fullness from that. Now, the only other thing as well, though, is you could argue is that you might, on your high day, depending on how high you go, it might be worth having fats in the diet on your high day or on your your carb up day, again, just to slow down that digestion of those carbohydrates. In my prep last year, I looked my best, I think the night before my first show out of the two, because I basically did a show. I had to qualify and I won that show, and then the week after, literally 7 days later, I competed the IFBB Amateur Olympia. So the night before my first show, I probably looked my best condition. Now, I think in the morning, by then I'd flattened out again.
Yeah.
And we did actually keep the carbs pretty high, and the fats were, reasonably up there as well. They weren't like dramatically low. And the only reason why I say low or high is because it was in proportion to what my normal diet was looking like. So actually, I was eating more fats than I was. Now, is there an argument to say, should you actually spill over the night before and look a little bit soft, a little bit bloated, so that then the next day you do harden up? Again, like that, because you've got, if you're asleep for 8 hours, that's 8 hours without any food. That's 8 hours where you're essentially still going to be utilizing fats and glucose. So you might want to actually try and spill over. And it was a question that I asked at the 3DMJ seminar. The answer I got was, I think, a conservative answer. But I think that when you kind of like delve into the research and you look at how much glucose an individual can take, and you start to look at, well, if a 70-kilo guy can take about 700 grams of glucose, or store glycogen, should I say, and that's across liver, blood, and skeletal muscle mass. 700 grams is a lot. Now, and then that's after your TDEE, right? So that's after let's say the 2,000 calories that you're going through. Big conservative, Yeah, so if you were burning, like, that's it, or utilizing 2,200 calories a day, predominantly most of that's coming from fats and carbohydrates. So then, there's going to be a proportion of that you're going to utilize anyway. So that still needs to be topped up, that amount that you're using. If I'm in an energy deficit on, I think, what's my macro, 2,100 calories I'm on now, and I'm in a pretty severe calorie deficit this week, like I've lost a good amount of weight. So you could probably put my maintenance calories up to, I don't know, 2,400 maybe, and that's being conservative, just an extra 300 calories. So then, once you've took that into the equation, and if you had you went to the extent of looking at what substrates you are actually oxidizing in greater percentages, that's not a bad idea. But anyway, you put that on top, and you could literally maybe go 1,000 grams of carbs. Or do you go 2 days of 500 for digestion purposes? I think with this prep, I've got a 500 then 400 day. So that's 900 really over the course of a couple of days there, and then I've still got a high day on my show day. So I think, but with Jeff, obviously he knows how well I responded to my last one, and throughout my whole kind of like day, the day before my show, I was constantly reporting, thinking, I think I can fill out a bit more. And I just had this gut instinct thinking, I think I can take a bit more food.
And that's the beauty of having a coach who you've worked with on multiple occasions, right? You can always adjust the next one, and it's very, very hard when somebody says, "Can you come and peak me?" when you haven't seen them throughout the prep, you haven't done a peak before, and it's because it is very individualized. And I tend to agree with the fact that you might want to look for a slight spillover the night before, because then you've got those hours where you're fasting to sort of pull it in. And I think a lot of people go, "Yes, I've nailed it the night before," but the night before is the night before, and potentially about 20 hours before that you actually want to peak. So, I think I was listening to Eric Helms say something along those lines not too long ago. So
interesting, actually, you say that, because as well, one of my clients, he ate a lot of food post comp, and
it wasn't me, was it?
No, it wasn't you this time. And he said to me, the next day he looked insane, right? So I said to him, okay, I want you to write down everything you ate and then send it over to me. So actually, because it was a first-time competitor, I didn't want to essentially make him going into the show, because you've got to think of the psychological aspect that giving someone 1,200 grams of carbs or whatever over a couple of days might do to them. They might feel like they're, if I would have done that to you for your last show, you were in bits anyway. You were already thinking I'm not conditioned enough, right? So if you go,
it's a fuck.
It is, yeah. So if you then give them a shitload of food and they feel like, oh my God, I'm just going to get fat eating all of this.
Yeah.
But actually, he's now proved to himself. So I went down a conservative approach. I think you should always should as a first-time competitor. He still had a good result, 3rd place. But then the next day, if he's woke up better and he wrote down and he sent over to me what he had, and it was a lot of food. I think he may have outdone you, Mike.
So obviously I know your protocols, and we're obviously going to touch on sodium and water. Was he honest about his sodium and water intake the day before, or potentially did he cut it? I don't know the background of this guy, because I think a lot of people go, oh, I looked great the day after my big cheat meal.
Yeah.
Potentially I didn't carb up enough, but in reality they may have been doing some funky shit with some water and some sodium, and then they've all of a sudden had a bit of sodium, had some water, obviously had the extra carbs and the fat in the cheat meal, and then they look a lot better, and they're just attributing that to the carbs and saying, oh, I didn't carb up enough, when potentially could have been some funky shit that they were doing somewhere else.
Yeah, no, I agree, mate. And like a lot of the time it's, well, you've just been drinking water and you've had sodium and you've kind of filled out, right? But actually in this case, water was pretty high at 6 to 7 litres a day. And sodium was high throughout his sodium diet. He's got a pretty high sodium diet anyway. So we just maintained all of that. And I kind of wrote it on the log just to keep things. Basically, I gave him an arbitrary amount and he just kept it consistent across the week. It was kind of where he was at anyway. And then, essentially it was interesting because, he sent over all these foods and they're high in fat, they're high in carb. So it wasn't just carbohydrates. I think a lot of people, you and I have both been to places where they're like, my carb up and I had, for example, a cheeseburger. And you're like, it's not really carbs. That's, or, chips. Again, there's pretty much just as many calories from fat in a portion of chips as there is carbohydrates. So I think you got to look at the two together. But he said the next day he woke up full hard and looked incredible. But then the few days after that, he really suffered from water retention. But so then you're kind of on a bit of a, I don't know, like a dagger's edge or something, because if that would have maybe happened a few hours prior, where he started to really get swollen ankles from, and he said to me, I think it was I don't know, I think it was maybe the calories in peak week, and I was like, are you sure it was? And he was like, okay, now thinking about it, maybe it was, or the calories are just 8, which is causing the water retention. So you are on a bit of a, a dagger's edge there, because it could go one way or the other. You could, if that water retention or edema that he suffered hit him earlier, he wouldn't have woke up the next day looking great. He'd have woke up looking bloody awful.
Yeah, and obviously sodium would come into that as well with the edema. Obviously, the guy's got a high sodium diet anyway, but potentially the food choices post-show are even going to be higher. And we know that the acute change to sodium is potentially good for vascularity on the day and things like that. But then when you start to spread that out and go a little bit more chronically, then you can actually you can actually retain water. And I know something about that myself in terms of what's happened to me. It could be that, and again stress as well and things like that. So maybe looking at the scales and going, fucking hell, I put on 3 kilos. Because stress is obviously going to lead to greater water retention.
So what we can do is maybe looking at sodium in the week. I mean, for us, it is a case of just keeping stuff slightly higher than maybe normal, than what they were on, perhaps. What I tend to do is find out kind of, do they heavily salt their food, or trying to get some loose indications. And then for a few days, I'll sort of try them on a certain amount. And if they're feeling good, if they're getting to the gym with a good pump, that's all I care about. is if they're getting vascular in the gym, and you know, if they get that, then I think great. Then I just keep them on that same amount. So it might be slightly higher, but we're not talking that a great deal.
Yeah, because obviously if it's too high, like those post comp foods, then you may be in excess of what the kidneys can actually filter out, and then obviously the excess of sodium will stimulate antidiuretic hormone, which would cause water retention. But sure, the salt sodium is obviously critical in terms of getting a pump. So I think we should maybe move on to sodium next. So obviously we've touched on sodium, maybe keeping it constant with maybe a little bump beforehand, and you think that would be wise, right?
Yeah, no, definitely just keeping the variables nice and consistent. And if you can start to look at this stuff, 2 weeks, 10 days out, even 7 days, the start of the week, you'll have by a couple of days, you'll see what, the effect of it really, by just having a slightly elevated more amount. And again, just by having a constant there.
Yeah, because a lot of people obviously go through their prep and perhaps they might be spicing things or salting things, to keep their chicken and broccoli less bland, and then all of a sudden peak week comes and they drop it all out, and then they struggle to get a pump and go, oh, the carbs aren't high enough. Yeah. When in fact it's actually the sodium, and we know that acutely you're gonna increase blood pressure, so obviously you're gonna vasodilate and make yourself look a little bit more vascular. So when people have cut that the salt and the sodium, and they think that they can't get a pump backstage, and they're going through rice cakes like nobody's business, it might just be effect that you just have a little bump of salt, some salt and vinegar crisps, or some, I know that me and you had like salted beef and salted cooked meats, and then a little bump of salt on the old finger, or in a little bit of BCAA.
Tequila shots, yeah.
Yeah, all the tequila. But you laugh, but people are drinking backstage, right?
Yeah.
I was astonished the first time I competed, and people drinking wine and whiskey.
I get it. Do you know what? I get that for the nerves. Like if you need a tipple, I get that completely. But yeah, we'll get on to like the drying out in a minute. But so in terms of sodium, keep things constant throughout the week. Yeah. I just use a simple measure of half a teaspoon or quarter of a teaspoon or whatever. And then it's just simple at the start of the day, basically. And this is what I say is add on to your food. So not the sodium that's already in your food. Because if you're sticking to single ingredient foods, it's going to be pretty minimal on the whole and fairly consistent. Yeah. And most people at that stage tend to write themselves a meal plan anyway, just to keep things easier with the macros that they have. But then, you can just literally go, okay, I've got this amount of salt. And this is what I did when I did a prep out I was lucky enough to have a peak week out in the Maldives for my 2014 show. And basically I just weighed out my salt every day, and I kept in a little pot.
Yeah.
And then what I did was at every meal, I just took a little pinch of that and put it on my food. Like, easy.
Done.
This peak week, I've kind of done it a little bit more flexible, and I've just kind of salted my food every day, which I've kind of been doing anyway, so I haven't gone completely crazy or anything, because my plan was just to keep things as regular as I have been doing. But then, maybe, on show day, there might be, I know that I tell my competitors 30 minutes out, maybe take a little bit more sodium on that day, and then it just helps them get a pump in it. And this is something you can try out, like, in the week before.
Yeah, that's exactly
pre-workout.
Right. The body's great at homeostasis, and it's gonna auto-regulate your aldosterone production in response to any chronic changes that you see in sodium throughout the prep or whatever. But I think just keep sodium constant, don't fear it, and then use it for its acute purpose. A bump before you go on, and you'll see that increase in blood pressure and get those veins out.
Nice. Unless you don't want that, and then don't do it.
Yeah, unless you're bikini or something like that, and
exactly.
They're not looking for the most vascular girl.
Exactly. So that's when again it comes down to being class specific, right? Yeah. But then even just if you're with a bikini competitor, just keeping things constant, then you can judge how they're looking in the week.
Sure. So Two things. Last two things, we'll go water and then what we would do for training. So water, obviously a lot is shown about water. You know, a lot of you've thought about it. You need to dry out, man. You're just holding water. Is there anything behind this?
Yeah, I think when it comes to drying out, it's a case of people assume that is essentially trying to take all the water out of the essentially between your muscle and your skin, trying to reduce that area as much as possible. That's what they think that drying out means.
Yes.
And then keeping all the water in the muscle cells so they look big, but then like reducing the other amount. In one of the feedback that I got at my IFBB show is they said to me, Steve, just don't dry out anymore. You're dry enough. And I was like, right.
You mean you're lean enough?
Yeah, and that's what they said to me, was that I was dry enough, and I was like, well, that's quite ironic because I think I've already had 7 liters today or something, or like 6 liters or something. Anyway, in actually, you see a lot of people, and I know in my first show that I ever did, I played around with this stuff. Like I think day 1 I had 6 liters of peak week, day 2 I had 7, day 3 I had 8, day 4 I had 9, day 5 I had 10. And literally, I got stuck in traffic, right? I had a posing class in London, and I was driving home, and basically, I was driving to Chris's house, actually, because I was staying at his, and I got caught in traffic in London, and it was so bad, I was literally, like, thinking, oh my God, I need to piss so badly. I'm going to have to go in a bottle, or I'm just going to have to wet my pants, because the cars were not moving. And anyway, I kind of managed to hold on, and I was like, do I have time to get everything out, get the tackle out, get the bottle, go for it before the car moves again, or do I just hold everyone up if it does move? What a dilemma. But anyway, I just saw this side street, and it was a one-way street going the other way, but I was like, I just can't not go. So I went down there, ran straight into the nearest building, which turns out to be a private hospital. And anyway, I just said to the reception, I was like, I'm really sorry, can I use your bathroom? And she goes, oh, we don't have a bathroom here for the members of the public. And I was like, well, I go on the floor here, and it's embarrassing for you and me, or I can go in your toilet. And she was like, yeah, it's around the corner on the right. I was like, thanks. Good decision.
I done the same. I done the old 10 litres, and you just got to sit back and think, what the fuck am I doing?
Yeah.
It's not magic, and like you said, I imagine that the day before that you cut all water, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So then basically what happens is once you've done your 10 liters or whatever crazy amount, and for me, like 10 liters is a lot. Like I'm not that big. I really don't need that much. And anyway, then that day before midday, cut water.
Yeah.
And so then you're like 24 hours before your show without you just sipping. And it is the worst feeling. And all you do is you walk around the house and you get cramp going up the stairs.
Yeah, no water, but you've got to carb up on dry rice cakes and peanut butter. Like, your mouth is just awful.
Yeah. And then the next day you feel like terrible. You've got headaches. You're constantly cramping. It's so difficult to pose because you start to cramp. And it is.
But yet 90% of people backstage are still doing it, right?
Yeah, in that again, like when I prepped with Lane, he had me on water, just high amount of water. When I was obviously in the Maldives and in Africa, I was on a little bit more because it was just hotter climate. And then show day, I walked into the backstage and I just chucked on the desk 6 bottles of 2 liters, and everyone looked at me like, "What?"
You meant.
They thought I was just brought that for after the show for everyone.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, it's for me now. And they just saw me drinking. They were like, what is he doing? Like, and I just had my my hoodie on and stuff. And they probably thought I looked god awful because I hadn't dried out. And then obviously get on show day. Did a good job. Very, very conditioning was pretty much there. I just didn't really have enough mass, I think, looking at the other guys. But yeah, certainly condition was there in the water. For me, it was a great psychological battle anyway. I had already won in the changing rooms.
Exactly, and we talked about sodium for the pump and things like that. You're obviously going to need water as well to maintain vascularity, because when we look at water and drying out, we hold water intracellular and extracellular, right? So intracellular, we synthesize glycogen, hold water within the muscle cells, organ cells, etc. And then extracellular, you have your what people consider subcutaneous water, which isn't subcutaneous water. It's in fact just held in a dermis layer of the skin, which is up to, I think it's up to like something like 3 mil anyway, and you can't really do a great deal about. And then you've also got it within the veins in plasma volume. So you drop water, you're going to drop water not only from this dermis layer or sub-Q layer, but you're also going to drop it from inside the muscle cell. So it makes no difference. The ratio is still the same. You're still getting flatter, and then also you've got none in the vascular system. So you're going to get a flatter look. Yes, you'll be holding less water in the sub-Q layer, or what they like to call it, but you're also going to hold less water everywhere else. So it's the same thing.
I think it might have been Lane actually said, like, you get a kind of 70-30 split from water retention, and basically the higher percentage is in the muscle mass, right?
Yeah.
So if aldosterone, like you said, creates homeostasis, it likes to stay the same. It's much smarter than you are, no matter what you try and do over that week. So I would much rather put as much water in the bigger area or the bigger compartment as possible, because I know I'm going to look much better, because I'm going to be looking a lot fuller. So I'd rather, go in with a little bit higher sodium, keeping that constant, a little bit higher water, keeping that constant. And then, already I can see, like, for myself this week, by keeping all the constants there, I'm not holding as much water because I'm not eating out as much. Those sort of fluctuations that can sometimes mask your results just aren't there. That's all you're trying to do, is get rid of all the masks, basically. Obviously, people worry about stress and doing things to reduce cortisol levels. But again, competing is a stressful event. Like, there's not much you can do to get around that. The only thing you can do is compete more, get more experienced, and become more at one with competing. Like, that's literally the best thing you can do.
So, with cutting stress and cortisol, let's look at training and what you would change, if anything, in the last week, and wrap up with how you would approach training in peak week.
Yeah, so I know what my coach Jeff's done with me this time. In what I kind of tell my clients is just to keep their training the same, but I put them on a deload week. My clients are pretty used to deloading, and we do that in a range of options. You can deload load, you can deload volume, you can deload frequency of sessions, you can deload in a multitude of ways. For them, I just tell them to back off the weights a little bit, like the load a little bit, but keep the volume there or thereabouts. So just focus on going into the gym, getting a bit of a pump. And for some people, depending on if I know they're a good trainer, I might say, look, just go in and enjoy yourself. Don't trade a failure. We use a reps to failure guide so I tell them how many reps shy of failure I want them to stay. And I might even get them to do a kind of typical bro split. So the start of the week, get legs out the way in the effort that inflammation's reduced by the end of the week, so that their legs look a little bit more conditioned. So again, taking out, like, for example, the heavy eccentric loading repetitions, reducing the tempo down, just literally what you would do to get a pump, slightly faster reps, some decent machine work, a little bit of cable work, dropping out some of the heavier compounds, but just kind of having fun, really.
Yeah, so a lot of people go through and try and deplete in this week, but potentially, like you say, you go to failure and, as we've seen, past failure, whatever that is.
You reach failure, and then you go beyond it.
Yeah, you're not quite getting the definition of failure there, pal. But and then, like you say, the heavy eccentric loading, you're just gonna cause stress on the muscle and make yourself have a harder time posing on stage. The last thing that you want is to go on there, riddled with DOMs, because you're not going to be able to present yourself in the best possible way. Because
obviously, you've got to factor in, your ability to pose. Something that I've learned with myself is that in order to get to a good rotation on my side poses, well, I'm actually doing a warm-up before I start posing, and I start to look at my, hip rotation, that kind of stuff, so I get a little bit more movement there. And that'll be something I'll be doing it backstage, is doing a bit of a warm-up in mobility work, so I can present a better package. When I was speaking actually to James Betts at Bath, who's a university lecturer there in exercise science, he was saying that one of the things that they do is get people to do heavy eccentric work in order to, and what they see after they've done that in some of the studies is that their legs really grow in terms of the acute effect of that. So they're larger, but then they might be bigger having serious, like after doing like a lot of heavy eccentric work because of the inflammation, but that doesn't necessarily mean they'll be more conditioned, and it's finding that balance. I think if I had a competitor with small legs, with decent condition, and they needed a little bit of size, and you might go, do you know what, do heavy eccentric work the day before in your legs and see if we can present them looking a little bit fuller. Yeah, might be an idea. Like why?
Yeah, again, it's tailoring it to the individual and the needs for that class, isn't it?
Yeah, like why? If something works one way, then it might work the other for for that population. So yeah.
So cardio. Finally.
Cardio is something that if I feel like my client is ready, like with Blake, he was ready early. He did a couple of cardio sessions at the start of the week, but then when I got him looking great, I kind of dropped that cardio out because I didn't need him to do anymore. Like, we're not using that cardio for any benefit of, creating a calorie deficit. So yeah, I kind of took that out. And that one for me is a case of, if my client's ready, I'd rather just keep them at maintenance with their weight training and their food intake. If they like doing the cardio, if they feel like they can get through a little bit more food that way by having it, then we can keep it in. But someone who is, for example, needing that week to do all they can in order to bring a better condition, then yeah, you're going to put cardio in.
It depends how ready you are. If you're ready early, then you could look to bring it down to, I would say, a moderate level, or even, cut it out like you did with Blake towards the back end of the week. But again, if you're needing that extra time in the deficit, then you're going to have to keep it in, which is obviously not the most optimal thing to do, because the last thing you want to do is cut it so fine that you're needing to kill yourself, ramp those cortisol levels up in peak week, just before you're about to compete, and you're not ready in time. But yeah, certainly. As well, I would gauge it on the amount of cardio that you're already doing. I know that I'm doing a lot, so for me to cut it down drastically,
Mike?
Take it down a little bit more. Does that make sense?
You broke there for about 10 seconds or so.
Yeah. So for me, I mean, like I would look at how much they're doing throughout their prep. So, like for example, myself, who's on a relatively high amount, then cutting that completely wouldn't be the best way to go, in my opinion.
But
I would maybe reduce it.
Yeah, taper.
Taper it down, because obviously that sudden drop of a lot of calorie expenditure from the cardio, as we spoke about right at the very beginning with the energy balance, and could potentially cause problems.
Because then you're not keeping constant variables, then, are you? So.
Exactly, yeah. So it would be more of a moderate taper for somebody who's doing excessive, or what we would deem as maybe a little bit more cardio, and then somebody who's doing a moderate amount throughout their prep could maybe really taper that down to bare minimum, really.
Yeah. Well, what we'll do is we'll cap that there.
Yeah.
And then maybe next week, on next week's podcast, we continue this. And maybe I talk about stage day, because obviously I'd have done that.
Yeah, show us just how badly you fucked it all up.
Yeah, and then all these things we've spoke about, how they're all bullshit. But then we can also go through some of the questions that we had. So if you've listened to this podcast and you can get a question over to the podcast at info@team-box.co.uk, we can tackle that next week. You can go on my Facebook page, look for the picture of Blake. He's the one who looks like a leaf. You can see a big string of comments on that. I think you did a post as well, Mike, on yours. But the best thing to do,
over on Team Box as well.
Yeah, but if you want your question, definitely read out, just email me. It's easier. I won't respond because I will be busy winning shows. Look forward to that. So take this opportunity to say a massive thank you again to MuscleFood for sorting us out with such great gifts for our retreat and our camp that we ran, and also just for continually supporting us in,
I'll wrap up by saying all the best for Sunday. You're looking on point. The photos I've seen are, you're there, mate. So it's now just about enjoying yourself, having a good time, and bringing home the trophy for us.
Nice. I've got legs today, a little light session, and then I've got a report into Jeff today. So
nice. Nice.
Cheers, mate.
Yeah. So good luck, and you'll smash it as always.
Thanks, buddy. No, I really appreciate that. I'm sure I'll be in to speak to you soon anyway.
Until next time.
And guys, thanks for listening. Please leave us a rating and a review and share with your network. It really means a lot to us. The more we can spread this podcast. So take care, guys, and I'll hopefully see you on the other side.
Bye.